Hi, everyone. I'm Leo Tonkin, founder and CEO of Salt Chamber, and I want to welcome you to our Fundamentals of Salt Therapy. This is our comprehensive program for our clients that we want you to understand how halotherapy works, its history, why it works, and the benefits in a way that you can have an easy way to talk about it, communicate it with your customers, your staff, and some other things to know about uh, the details, if you will, all about salt therapy. So, when you first talk about salt therapy, many people are already familiar with it, right? Whether we gargled with it, whether we have exfoliations, saline solutions, nebulizers, neti pots, smelling salts, baths, people are already familiar that salt has some various healing qualities to it. And so it's not a far stretch, and it's not something that's necessarily new for somebody to grasp. Many people know that when they go by the ocean, they feel healthy by being there. And salt has been used throughout the centuries as a preservative, as lots of ways of being utilized in terms of being a therapeutic way to restore balance and wellness. Even by the ocean, though, what all of these types of modalities of salt therapy have been is what we would call wet salt therapy. And that's very distinct from what halotherapy is all about, which is dry salt therapy. Halo is the Greek word for salt. Thus, salt therapy, halotherapy, is all about dry salt therapy. And according to the Salt Therapy Association, and all the research and the articles in the published medical journals talk about how dry salt is actually more effective. One of the core basic principles is that it's super absorbent, so that as you are inhaling the salt particles, it literally is absorbing the toxicity, the mucus, the allergens, the things that you and I breathe in every day. It absorbs that, and you either are expelling it out through your coughing or it's going through your waste system because it's water soluble. The molecule of the sodium chloride is also designed in such a way that it acts like a scrub brush, cleaning out the respiratory system because things get caught in the lining of our respiratory system. The second characteristic of dry salt therapy is that it's anti-inflammatory. So as you breathe this in, it is actually taking some of the constricted air passageways and it's actually widening them, opening them up. Very similar to what steroids do for people with asthma or with COPD. But this is a natural anti-inflammatory. And the third aspect is that it's antibacterial. So you and I are constantly being exposed to airborne pathogens, things that we inhale. And so likewise on our skin and things that we get into, the salt is antibacterial. So it literally is stopping viruses and bacteria from spreading. So we'll learn a little bit more about that, but those are the three principles. Now, where it has its roots, and really where this has evolved from, is in Europe. And it really is evolved from what is known as speleotherapy. Speleotherapy happens to be where people were down inside the salt mines. And these were prevalent throughout Eastern Europe and throughout Russia and all over, where miners, people were underground, working, chiseling away at the salt. And there was very different climate conditions underneath there. They had different atmospheric pressure. The humidity and temperature was very different. And this was an area that the sun had no impact on. So there was no pollen. There was really a very sterile type of environment, if you will. And as they were mining and leaving out hollowed out areas, the doctors in the 1800s started to realize the impact that this was having on people. And so people would be traveling at great distance to go to these areas where they had these underground health resorts, if you will. And the physicians started to really have people go there and spend hours, if not days, underground inside these caves. And this is really where it took off. And then throughout the mid-1900s, there were these health resorts, if you will, where people would spend time down inside these salt mines. So that's really where it started from. Now, the Russians were interested in how to replicate this. How is it that rather than go to these limited places that cost a lot of money for people to travel to, how could they recreate this environment? Thus, they created the very first halo generator back in 1976. And they started to look at how can we make a man-made type of environment utilizing this halo generator and putting it into a room. And as they were doing their research, they realized that the halo generator was creating different sized particles, and that the smaller the particle, the deeper down into the respiratory system it was having an effect. And thus, the very first salt rooms that were being opened actually were in the medical environment. They were in hospitals and clinics and daycare centers. And then at the fall of the Soviet Union, you had salt rooms, spreading throughout all of Europe. And in fact, the very first salt rooms that were here in the United States were built and designed from people in Europe. And they were designed to also mimic what it was like to be in one of these salt caves. Hence, where you find some of the first salt rooms here with this white salt being put on to the walls and onto the floors, etc. So let's take a look at how it works. Now, there are very different types of salt that's out there. There's Epsom salts, Himalayan salt, we have Dead Sea salt, salt in the Caribbean that is mined, Mediterranean salt, there's rock salt that's utilized. But the type of salt that we use in halotherapy is pure grade sodium chloride. Okay, it doesn't contain any additives. It is salt that comes from nature, that comes from salt beds, salt lakes, salt from the ocean, from the mines, but it's been processed in a way to remove all of the dirt, the debris, and any other minerals. So what you are left with is pure sodium chloride, okay? So this is the type of salt that is being utilized in all of the halo generators. And this is something that has been aligned on, not only with the Salt Therapy Association, but all halo generator manufacturers. It is also the salt that was used for all the clinical studies. So while some people think that, that there's Himalayan salt, that may be true for a decor, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That's not the case of what we are breathing in. So the only salt that's utilized is this pure grade sodium chloride. Some refer to it as pharmaceutical grade. I particularly don't necessarily like to use that word because some people have the impression that it's man-made or artificial salt. No, this is salt that's been purified, just like the saline solutions that are used in hospitals. It's 99.99% pure sodium chloride. The other salt, let's say if you were to use Himalayan salt, even though it has trace minerals and elements in it, some of those trace minerals and elements really are not water soluble. And if you inhale those, that becomes sediments deep in your respiratory system. Plus, there could be dirt and debris inside of those salt crystals. So the only salt that we utilize is pure grade sodium chloride. So a lot of people talk about salt rooms in terms of the public are finding out about salt rooms and such. And so basically, as many of you are realizing, a salt room basically is an enclosed room that has a halo generator attached to it. And the salt cave, as some people refer to, basically is just a type of decor. But really what we're talking about is the whole phenomenon of halotherapy, is being able to take a halo generator and attach it to a room, and then you have what is known as halotherapy. So you have a halo generator, and it is attached to an outside wall of a room with a sleeve and a hole coming into the room to disperse the dry salt aerosol. Now, many of you have some of our salt booths, and it's similar to the way that it's designed, with the halo generator on the outside, pushing the salt aerosol into the confined space of the booth. And how a generator works is basically three main components. You have a feeder, you have the grinder, and you have the fan. And so salt gets put into the salt tank, the feeder, and then the grinder is grinding it into micronized sized particles, and then it's dispersed into the room or into the booth. Now, let's just talk for a moment about a micronized sized particles. These are very small particles, and they are so small that you barely can see them. Some people in salt rooms want to turn it up and have it so that you could see the salt coming out, because otherwise customers will think they're not, getting anything. But that's not the case. If you look at the size of bacteria and smog and even dust mites, it's amazing how small these particles are. So if you take a look at your hair, for example, as in this picture, it's about 50 to 70 microns in diameter. And if you look at pollen or ragweed, you're talking still a significant micron size compared to the microns that are generated from a halo generator, which are about 2 microns. So that is getting very deep into our respiratory system, which is also why it gets into our skin and penetrates the epidermis, because it gets inside through the skin cells. So how much salt are we really utilizing? Oh, as I just said, more is not better. We typically think that if I work out harder, or if I do certain things and push myself, or more of something is better. That's not the case with halotherapy. The majority of the particle sizes, at least from our halo generators, are about 2 microns. And the research to date is about 10 to 24 micron particles per cubic meter of air volume is where the results are coming from. So some people have this perception of walking into a salt room like maybe coming into a steam room with this cloud of salt. That's not the case. It's really a smaller amount of concentration that's getting deep into the respiratory system. So there could be various programs scheduled and set up inside of your halo generator based on the size of the room and the concentration levels. That's something that you will get as you get into your training with your Salt Effects halo generator. And the salt is the only consumable that you really have. A 10-pound container today is about $25, and depending on the size of the room or the booth that you're utilizing, you're going to get a lot of sessions out of that kind of container. Now, a lot of people want to know about, well, how often do I go, and how often do you recommend people going for a salt therapy session? Well, here in the United States, that has not been established. We do not have this approved by the FDA. In some countries, particularly in Russia, as you see here, they started to develop some protocols in terms of what conditions people might have, in terms of how many treatments somebody should be doing in a certain amount of time. However, in the United States, if you're doing that, you would be considered a medical professional because you are not in the business of diagnosing and prescribing unless you are a medical professional. And while the Salt Therapy Association is sponsoring additional research, and as more research is done throughout the world, that's the direction we are heading. So in your facility, in offering salt therapy, while some people experience benefits right off their first session, it's really more on self-care. And as we'll see, some people are doing this every day. Some people are doing it 2 to 3 times a week or several times a month. So there are things to do in terms of making recommendations based on testimonials, based on sharing of other information. But you want to be careful about you not specifically telling people, given this condition, this is what to do. We're not set up that way as of yet. Now, there are places around the country where they promote themselves as having salt therapy, but they don't have a halo generator. They have these beautiful salt caves, or they have salt walls in a room, or things of that nature. And if you do not have a halo generator, you don't have halo therapy. It's just that simple. So where has this sort of confusion come from? Well, as halo therapy was gaining its ground back in the early 2012, at least that's when Salt Chamber was starting, people were becoming more familiar with Himalayan salt lamps. And they were making all these claims about that it produces negative ions and it absorbs dust from the air and all of this type of claims that they were making. And there are even those that are making claims of certain spa equipment or salt walls or things that people may have in their facilities. But as the evidence shows that these things that people are talking about, advertising on their websites, promoting in their treatment menus, none of this is true. It does not release these negative ions. These are the things that people are talking about, that it's hygroscopic in nature, that it purifies the air. Some go say that it reduces allergies and asthma, or it improves breathing or stress, and it increases your energy. Well, there's been a lot of studies about this, and there was a comprehensive report that talked about these negative ions and that it has absolutely no impact on respiratory. Even if they were around, it doesn't impact the respiratory system at all. The negative ions, while there's a lot of evidence in terms of the mental and emotional well-being, it really doesn't do anything for the respiratory. I know people talk a lot about electromagnetic frequencies, the things that we're constantly bombarded with, and how the HVAC systems and everything that it's providing in our space. And while there are negative ions in nature, and we wish that we could replicate that, that just simply isn't true by just having Himalayan salt or salt into these rooms. The halotherapy, by producing the dry salt aerosol in a room, does create a clean room, so that in terms of the positive ions that are there, the salt is actually counterbalancing that. But in terms of negative ions from heating up Himalayan salt or walls to produce negative ions, there's no evidence for it. In fact, there's a lot of studies about it all over that talk about it. And that's something that has been recently addressed within the Salt Therapy Association. Some of the top known chemists and physicists talk about that salt is very stable as a product, as an element, if you will. And if you were actually to separate that molecule into a positive or negative ion, they're saying you would need to heat it up to about 1,500 degrees. Well, that's not happening with a light bulb. That's not happening with LED lights behind a Himalayan brick wall. And it's certainly not happening when you're inside of a sauna just with a nice decor. Doesn't produce any of those types of benefits, if you will. In terms of the Himalayan salt or any other salt being super absorbent and, absorbing dust in the air, well, it's possible that there's some level of humidity that could trap a dust particle and then bring it into by the salt lamp. But even in a sauna, it hardly has any humidity in it. So this has been one of the things that's been really a lot of myth information. And at the inaugural Salt Therapy Association conference, this was brought up to over 250 attendees that had been there. And since, there's been articles that the Salt Therapy Association has promoted, and even recently, some additional information. Now, while there may be some evidence that there's a large amount of any kind of element in a confined space like a room, we do know that everything resonates and vibrates at a certain frequency, whether that's quartz or amethyst or jade and even Himalayan salt. So it can alter the feeling in the space, so to speak. And more importantly, there's a lot of evidence around chromotherapy or the color therapy in terms of creating a nice ambiance into a space. But you do not need any decor to have a salt room. If you have a halo generator, you have halotherapy. So, no evidence whatsoever about heating salt lamps. And I know some of you are looking at having that as a retail component in your facility. That's great. They do make great lamps. They do look great in a bedroom or in a treatment room or a massage room, and it has a nice glow to it. But you want to be very careful of the language that you are using. I see a lot of salt facilities around the country that get local press, and I often see them misrepresenting, saying things like a Himalayan salt room. And while it's true as a decor, that's not the essence. That's not where it comes from. It does provide a great soothing and relaxing color. And as I mentioned, the chromotherapy and the light really can impact people. And there's also a strong placebo effect. So for those naysayers out there that say, oh, I have the salt lamp, it makes a difference, a lot of that could be psychosomatic in terms of what people think and feel and believe. Now, recently, this has become more serious because there's now a class action lawsuit that has been filed in federal court against one of the companies that promotes all of these benefits. And you want to be careful around what you language. The Salt Therapy Association recently sent out to all of its facility members some of the research behind this to make sure with certain recommendations about utilizing the right language to talk about your Himalayan salt decor or products. So I strongly encourage you to go to their website and take a look at some of that information. So that's really distinct from anything else. Dry salt therapy really has nothing to do with the Himalayan salt. Where halotherapy makes the difference is really in your total health and wellness. it really truly impacts so many different aspects of our wellness. So while I mentioned it earlier, if we really take a look at how it impacts our lungs, according to the Salt Therapy Association and all of the research, this dry salt is what is super absorbent. This is what is hydroscopic in terms of being absorption of the things that you and I breathe in and day out. And while dry salt is great for people with a variety of respiratory conditions, it goes far beyond that. But if you just start to think about how many people that face and deal with some of these conditions, it is a pretty wide-reaching audience in terms of what impacts us. Likewise, it works on its skin. Because these particles are so small, it does penetrate the epidermis. And the same characteristics of being super absorbent. If somebody has oily skin, it's going to pull that moisture away from the skin cells. It also is going to get more of a pH balance on the skin because it actually has the larger salt particles remain on its surface so that it actually absorbs moisture and makes the skin more rigid. It also accelerates the growth of hair health because of it being something that is killing off bacteria. So there's a lot of benefit of exposing the skin. Many people in the salt rooms have blankets for people, etc. If your skin's not exposed, then you're not going to get the full benefit. Now, obviously, there are people that have certain skin conditions that may not be able to expose their skin because you're in a multi-faceted room with different kinds of people in, and they not feel comfortable. That's why many people have a salt booth, or that some people are in some spas having salt rooms, both in the men's side and the women's side. So that's something that you should be aware about in terms of providing salt therapy for people. There are some facilities that have special hours in the day that are for women or for men for these types of situations. So if you start to look at our world's population, respiratory and skin conditions are by far the largest segments of illnesses and disease facing us. And if you just start to look at it, people that are dealing with asthma, allergies, bronchitis, cystic fibrosis, etc., is increasing each year. The same is true with eczema and psoriasis and acne and the things that you and I deal with on a daily basis. So it's no accident that when you are watching primetime TV, the most expensive TV commercials are typically around these conditions. There is a lot of money that big pharma is making off of these conditions on a regular basis. Why is this all happening? Well, if you just start to look at it, you and I are breathing a lot. It's something we do involuntarily. We don't think about it too much. But we have somewhere around 20,000 breaths a day. If you're working out, it's going to be a little bit more. That's a lot of breathing that you and I do. The question becomes, what's in the air that you and I breathe? We're living at a different time today with raging fires and airborne pathogens, things that are in the air. Our air quality has been impacted. Whether or not you believe in climate change and what's happening, there's more that you and I are dealing with on this daily basis. What's even more interesting is the indoor quality of our air. That's where you and I spend most of our times. And between our HVAC systems, our air conditioning, the things that we use inside from cooking, and the chemicals that we use, and all of these other things, You and I are exposed to a lot of these microparticles that get inside of our system. So that may be a source of why our skin and our respiratory conditions are in the way that they are. And that's why dry salt therapy is really such a alternative, complementary wellness ritual. It's what we call respiratory hygiene. So whether you have certain conditions or not really isn't the issue for you to attract customers. It really is because how else are you cleaning out your respiratory system? You clean out the air filters in your home, which we should be doing a lot more frequently. And we should be doing things about the quality of the air inside of our offices and homes. Because if we don't, we are going to have different alternatives. You see a lot of people in other parts of the world wearing masks because the particle sizes in their environments are so large that that's what they're needing to utilize. So healthcare costs are rising. People are looking for alternative ways to stay healthy. We're seeing a very big boom in the direction of the pendulum swinging more towards wellness, where people are being proactive. And that's why you're seeing more med spas, wellness centers, newer modalities being more adapted, especially in the United States. Now, there's a lot of people that think there's not a lot of scientific research, that they're still waiting to, there's skeptics out there. Well, if you actually go and look it up, you will see publication after publication of how salt therapy is impacting people with things like COPD or with acute bronchitis and others and others. And you can see all of these articles at the Salt Therapy Association. They're getting ready to actually publish a whole medical guide so that those of you that are in the business and you want to educate the medical professionals around your community, you're going to have a whole toolkit in which you'll be able to provide that as a facility member. So who benefits from dry salt therapy? Really, anybody that breathes. You're seeing athletes getting into salt therapy because it helps expand their lung capacity with increased oxygen to red blood cells. This is great for actors and singers and others who constantly use their vocal cords. As some of you know myself, and the way my voice sounds, I experienced throat cancer a year and a half ago, where I was heavily radiated and I had chemotherapy and I had a stage 4 tumor at the back of my tongue and had a tracheotomy inside of me and had a lot of mucus. And it was not a great time in my life. But thank God for the people around me and for my physicians and for salt therapy, because I've been cancer-free since, and the prognosis is very good for my life in terms of not having any remissions. But it just works on my vocal cord. So after this webinar, I'll be back into the salt booth here in our showroom because it really impacts the inflammation of a lot of the things that we are bringing into our system. This is great for recovery time. Athletes are now, you're seeing in fitness clubs, recovery rooms where you go in and breathe in differently. People are in spas making different treatment packages out of when the skin is exfoliated to then be in a salt room. This is great for people who travel when you're in a confined airspace, in a plane or a train or subway or wherever you may be. People are exposed to so many things. So there's so many ways in which salt therapy can benefit people. Great for pets and animals. As many of you know, We provide our equipment for a lot of the race industry for equine horses. We have veterinarians now getting into salt therapy. So it just impacts so many people and so many ways in which salt therapy is being beneficial for people. Is it safe? It really is. There's really been, in all of the studies, no adverse side effects. Some people may, in a salt room, cough, scratchy throat a little bit, but that's all signs of it's doing its job. You can't overdose from having too much salt therapy. We have children and young adults that are doing salt therapy every day in their homes because of having cystic fibrosis. And they really aren't really supposed to be out in public in this type of environment. So they're doing it daily. The people that worked in the salt mines were doing it and exposed to it on a daily basis. We have yoga instructors that are doing salted yoga sessions and doing that on a daily basis. We have licensed massage therapists that are doing salted massages where a halo generator is attached to a small massage room and they're exposed to it on a regular basis. So you really can't overdose. Keep in mind, salt's antibacterial. So the salt rooms and the salt booths for people that are slightly coughing in a room or anything can be safe, knowing that the dry salt particles that are in the air being circulated is antibacterial. So you're always having a clean and germ-free environment. So you have no real issues in the salt therapy. Now, people often ask, what are the contraindications? Well, you don't really want people coming to a public salt facility that have any acute issues and fevers. Active tuberculosis, open wounds in sores, mostly for the health concerns and issues. Later stage lung cancer, people really should be consulting their physicians. People that have anything contagious shouldn't be coming to a salt facility. Same thing with pregnancy. It's been known to be safe, but many of you have received, and if you haven't yet, you will, a form that you should be utilizing for all first-time visitors. That's a general disclaimer that talks about how the FDA has not approved this. We're not making any claims of this curing or treating or anything, plus that people are doing this on their own, and that if they have any questions or concerns, they really should consult their physicians. That's more of a liability thing. Now, a lot of people say, well, I'm supposed to be on a low sodium diet, or I have high blood pressure, or I'm have hypertension. Well, that's the digestive system. This is the respiratory system. And to date, the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that are getting salted every day here in the United States, and for the tens of thousands of people that have been doing it for well over decades over in Europe, there have not been any real issues that have been reported that there's any contraindication with that. Now, what are some of the ways you maintain and operate a salt room or a salt booth? So we want to talk a little bit about this. You're going to get a lot more details in your training that you're going to get when you receive your halo generator or when it's installed, because it comes with a user manual. You're going to get online training one-on-one, and it really is fairly simple. But basically, one of the things that we recommend is a couple things. One, to have a small crock pot near your halo generator. Because this salt is so pure, you don't want to leave it out. And while you might have a container for it, excuse me, throughout the day, you want to be able to have fresh salt. And so by having a small crock pot on low and leaving it uncovered so there's no condensation, means the salt is not going to absorb any of the moisture, even if you're in relatively low humidity. So we recommend having a small crock pot. The cleaning of the halo generator really is going to be based on the frequency of the use. If you're going from one session to the next, putting salt in, having a session, and then it's constantly being utilized, then salt's not at a resting stage. Where it becomes more of an issue is if you have one session and then you might not have a session for a while. Well, if you leave the salt or any of the residue in there, then that has an opportunity to absorb any kind of moisture. So you're going to want to take one of the brushes that comes with it and clean it out, or use one of the air cans in terms of what you're going to be utilizing, so you don't do that. And at the end of the day, there's a ritual that's about less than 5 minutes where you're taking the grinder and the feeder and you're really making sure that it's clean. And that's what the special brushes are for the various halo generators. In between salt rooms, you're going to wipe down the chairs. You really don't want to use any wet products or chemicals inside of a salt room or a salt booth. People often ask, if you have the loose salt on the floor, how do you clean that? Well, keep in mind, salt's antibacterial. We strongly recommend that people are not bringing in any food or foreign substances, and people really should be having booties or socks on that are coming into a salt room and are not barefoot, where you would get maybe things happening. But typically what some people do is a couple of times a year, they may vacuum that floor salt, which is like similar to cleaning out a fish tank, where you have a vacuum cleaner with a hose at the end that has a small screen. So you're just vacuuming out whatever particles may be there, leaving the salt behind. Some people put fresh salt in, maybe occasionally adding more during the year as the salt gets crushed by being walked on and such. But in terms of the walls or things that are in your salt room, there's really not much to do in terms of cleaning it. So in between sessions, wiping down the chairs. Now, in your particular facility, there may be other things that are in there, like fixtures and such. And so that just needs regular cleaning with just a Swiffer. While you'll be spending some time looking at how do you price and develop a menu for your salt therapy, many facilities have a price for a single session. And obviously having a package of sessions is where people want to have an incentive to buy those because they're getting a discounted rate. Some facilities have memberships. So for X amount of dollars a month, that just rolls over from month to month, they have allotted certain amount of sessions or unlimited sessions. So depending on your facility and how you're configured, these are some of the things that we will review with you. Some facilities, as I mentioned, develop signature treatments where, while salt therapy is great as a standalone, they may package it along with a massage, where to be in a salt room first and get that level of relaxation and then be in a massage room. Or if you've had a facial or a skin treatment, to then be in a salt room, or various ways that you can develop your own signature treatments. And I strongly encourage people to obviously have a retail component in your facility, in your reception area. So having an additional revenue stream on products that relate to a salt room, such as the Get Salted line or other skin type products that are out there, are really great things that provide additional revenue for you and for your business by having that kind of traffic coming in and out of your facility. If you have not had your conversations yet with our marketing officer, you will be looking at that with him in terms of having a website, making sure you have the right language and claims and disclaimers, what you're to do in terms of social media, making videos, getting local public relations, how to develop networking within your community, establishing strategic alliances with others, whether that's a fitness club or a yoga facility or a pediatrician or a child care center or what have you. There's ways of developing and collaborating with people around you, creating educational and awareness programs about how halo therapy can really impact people, even going to the businesses around and corporate wellness. So there's just a lot of different ways of marketing this and making sure that you're collecting testimonials from the people that do visit you. There are things to be tracking, such as marketing metrics. You know, how many new customers are coming in? What's your source of those leads of people coming in your door? Are you converting them into packages or memberships? Are they renewing it? Are you getting referrals? Are the people coming in from those strategic alliances? So there's a lot of things that you can be doing. I also strongly recommend that you become a facility member of the Salt Therapy Association, not just because of the research that they're doing, but they've got a lot of great materials that are pre-printed that you can get. So it's not that you're making the health claims of what salt therapy can do, but you can point to the trade association so that it is the one that are making the statements about how dry salt therapy can impact a variety of conditions, a variety of audiences and demographics, et cetera, et cetera. So next steps. Well, you might be in the design, build, and then install stage of your salt facility as you're doing this webinar. And so there's other things that will be coming up, such as scheduling your marketing coaching session, or that you are just about to get your Halo generator, or you may have just received it. I encourage you to join that STA and to ask questions. I know some of you have questions that as they come up during this webinar, so feel free to please reach out, get in communication with us, and so that we can make sure that you're successful and profitable with your salt therapy facility and offering salt therapy in your existing business. I want to thank you for your time. Hopefully this was informative. This will be available to you on our client resource page. So I encourage you that if you want to watch this again or share this with other staff members, please do so. I know there's a lot of information here, but I really appreciate your time and thank you all very, very much. Have a great day.